Hello everyone and welcome to a new tutorial here in the channel. Today I want to show you how to do this right here. It's a very fun little exercise that's going to show you how we can think outside the box to generate a very cool little terrain piece right here. Now I'm doing this for 3D print. I'm actually 3D printing it right now. However, this can be used for environment, games, movies, whatever you want, and it's a very simple process. So let's go. Also, before we go there, two things that I want to ask you. Please, if you're not subscribed, it could really help us if you subscribe. Over 60% of you guys are not subscribed. So a little sub right there will be very cool. Also, if you want to check our full courses, the link's going to be there on the description. Let's go. I'm going to start here inside of Maya, and I got this cube. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the options, actually, and I'm going to increase a lot of subdivisions on the height. So I'm going to say something like 50 subdivisions should be more than enough, which is, as you can see, right around there. Now, on this other side, I'm just going to give 4 and 4. Now, why am I giving it more subdivisions on the y-axis, or on the up and down axis? Because we're going to scale this up. We're going to scale this up until we got a relatively, like a long cube right here that we're going to be using to generate this very cool arc that we're going to be utilizing. And there's a very important reason. We're going to be using a tool called the bend deformer. So if we go here to the deform options and we use this nonlinear bend, what we can do is we can bend this into a circle like that, right? So you're going to see how we're going to be able to do the trick that I want to show you. But this is a very easy way to generate a circle. However, you cannot do that if you have a circle with very few subdivisions. So for instance, let's say we had 10 subdivisions only. Okay, and I do the exact same thing, right? So I scale this up, and then I add the same nonlinear bend modifier. When we do this, you can see that we're gonna get this very like horribly looking like a low polygon or like pixelated. It's not pixelated, but you know what I mean. Like it's not gonna look as smooth as this one right here. So that's what we need this one. Now we're gonna use a little bit of everything. I told you in the first video, like this is a slightly different way to do things. Normally I try to just keep everything in a single software or just a single tool. This is more like what we actually do in a studio, where you use as many tools as you need to get to the result that you're going for. So what I need to do here is I need to generate a variation of this thing so that we can get those like very nice layers. So I'm going to grab this one right here. I'm going to freeze the transformation. I'm going to go to mesh. Mesh is a very cool tool inside of Maya that we can use to do a sort of like procedural repetition, instancing of our element. I'm not sure I have mesh video on this channel, to be honest, but we'll probably talk a little bit more about it later. So I'm going to go here to the mesh distribute, and you can see that right now it's doing just like a very like simple linear distribution, which is fine. But in this case, I'm actually going to do a grid distribution. There we go. This is a little bit closer to what I'm looking for. So what we can do here is we can increase the amount of points. Let's go 6, I think is a good number on the x-axis, and 6 on this axis as well. And then I'm going to increase the distance just barely. You're going to see why in just a second. So there we go. So right now what we see here is we have a bunch of this cubes being repeated in this sort of like pillar or column, right? Well, we can go back here to the mesh editor, to the mesh network, and we can add now, for instance, a random modifier. So I'm going to use this random transform. Which one is it? Let's do a random. So I'm just going to click and say add random. There you go. And look at that. With this random modifier, what we're doing is we can push the position of the cubes, we can push even the rotation, and we can push the scale. I accidentally deleted there. Let's go again. So there we go. Random modifier right there. So what I want to do here is I want to change the scale, right? I'm going to have a random scale on the y-axis, as you can see right here. That's a little bit too much. I'm going to remove, let's keep absolute scale. There we go. So I just want to create a little bit of this sort of like variation right there on the elements. Actually, no, I do want to change absolute scale. I'm going to explain why in just a second. If we change absolute scale, we can do this, and then we can also change the scale on all of the other axes like separately. So as you can see, we're going to get a very interesting, again, distribution right there. So now we can again play a little bit, for instance, with the position. Just offset them up a little bit there on Z. I don't want to have a lot of offset on Z and on X right now. It's going to be a very simple one, but I do want to have a little bit of stuff. There you go. So as you can see, we generate this very cool looking sort of like pattern on both sides of the element, right? I'm not sure if it's perfectly symmetrical. kind of looks symmetrical, but we're gonna break that in just a second. So the cool thing about this is you can literally just Control D, and now you've duplicated the repro mesh, which is this one right here. At any point we can hide it, by the way, with this little button right here. And this is a new mesh, a new like perfectly usable mesh right here. Now, I'm a little bit worried because if we go to the top, you're going to see that this mesh right here has a lot of holes. And I eventually want to 3D print this. And all of these negative areas are going to make the object very flimsy. And it's going to make the object also a little bit difficult to support. I'm going to Control D to duplicate this. And as you can see, I'm going to try to fill in the holes right there. One thing I can do, for instance, is rotate this, guys, to give it a little bit more variation. And see how now islands are getting connected a little bit more, right? We can even just like push them down a little bit, again, to generate a little bit of variation. And now we get this very, very interesting effect right there. Let's go to the top view again. This is our element right here. And I'm going to add a cube at the very center. Actually, let me delete the repro mesh. Oh, not that one. There we go. So let's bring this back. Let's freeze transformation and bring them back to X. There we go. And this new cube that I'm adding here, I'm going to scale it up because it's going to be sort of like the main cube support there at the nucleus of things. As you can see there, it's gonna be like a structure that's gonna be supporting the whole thing. Not all the way, right? But high enough that it will give elements again a nice little support. Now that one right there, one of the things that we're missing, because we're gonna be bending this, remember, one of the things that we're missing is divisions. So I'm gonna go to Edit Mesh, and we are going to do an Insert Edge Loop. Double click on the tool. And let's do 20. I don't remember how many did we add to the first ones. I think it was 20, right? 20 should be more than enough. There we go. And that's how we do it. Now, again, I'm going to go to the top view. And if I check this, these guys, for instance, are floating a little bit. So I'm just going to duplicate this cube right here and use it to bridge those elements right there. I might even use this one right there as well. And right there. I'm trying to keep the sort of like silhouette that we have with all of the cubes. For instance, this one right here, like that's very dangerous. I'm just gonna grab it and push it. And this is where I mean, we're using this sort of like procedural effect, right? The procedural approach to do these elements. But it's important that you understand that not everything that is procedural means that it has to stay that way. There's always a little bit of like finicking, or is that the proper word? Like there's always going to be a little bit of changes that we can add to the elements to generate something that looks a little bit more interesting. So there we go. That to me looks good. We still get this very like thin lines. Again, for instance, this cube right here, it's giving me a little bit of a worry there. It's going to again collapse. This is because I have a little bit more experience with resin 3D printing, so I know when things are going to be very, very flimsy, like this cube right here, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just gonna make it smaller. So I do want to like push it out to get like an interesting silhouette, but not too much. There we go. That's a little bit better. And that's it. We got this sort of like very interesting rocky effect going up pretty much everywhere. We grab everything, we combine into a single object, and then we're gonna say deform, non-linear, and bend. And now when we bend this, look at that. That looks like a portal, right? It's sort of like very, I don't know how to call it, but yeah, this looks, I like it. I really like how this looks. I think it's a very, very nice shape that we have right here. And even though it's going to be a little bit tricky to print, shouldn't be that much of an issue. And that's one of the big advantages of resin 3D printing. It's the fact that you get access to being able to print shapes that, at least traditionally with FDM or with filament, is not as easy. So once we're happy here, I'm going to delete history, freeze transformation, so that we get rid of the modifier. And I also need to think about this, right? Because if I were to place this on a table, right, as a terrain piece or something, it's going to look cool, but it's going to fall down. So we need to create a little bit of a base. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to sort of like turn it around a little bit, sort of like around this angle. There we go. And eventually, of course, we're going to have to do a little bit of sculpting. This is going to be inside of ZBrush, where we create a base, right? Go to the front view. Actually going to delete this guy's right here. There we go. Oh. And I'm going to use soft selection here. Gonna like push this thing and give it a base so that when we place it on the tabletop, things do not fall, right? Like that's gonna be the supports. It could be sand, it could be again rocks, something. We're going to do this inside of ZBrush, of course. That's where ZBrush comes into play. Now, if this is the first time you're seeing 3D software, which probably not, right? If you're looking for this sort of like advanced topics, or not advanced topics, but a little bit more interesting models, that's probably because you've already used 3D. But if you are completely new to 3D and you want to learn a little bit more about ZBrush, Maya, or Blender, or any other softwares, make sure to check our premium courses. The description down here is my site, or you're going to find my site, and you can find all of the elements right there. There we go. I really like this one. It's looking quite nice. And again, from experience, I know that all of this is going to print just fine. Barely any support. Why? Because the way 3D printers work, at least resin 3D printers, is as long as a curvature kind of like follows the same sort of like path of the element, you're going to get a nice result. And in this case, that's what's happening here. So unless we have like very crazy overhangs, which we don't in this particular element right here, you're not going to have to do that. And now the cool thing is this piece, you can use it multiple times. So if we rotate it the other way, if we scale it down a little bit to make a smaller one, we might even create like a little bit of like something like this right here, right? So this sort of effects, like you can just go crazy with this. You can use this for renders, and even if you don't have a 3D printer, you can still do cool stuff with this ones. So that's it for this one, my friends. Well, not this one. The video is not over, but this is it for this stage right here. The next thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna export this, guys, and I'll see you back in ZBrush so that we can continue with the sculpting. Now, this next part, my friends, I'm sorry, but I actually messed up the microphone, so I'm not going to be able to do this real time. This is a recording on top of the whole thing. So what I'm doing here is I'm importing the object into ZBrush, and the cool thing about FBXs is that it will retain each separate object as a different subdivision. So here we have the lower portion of the sphere, and we, of course, have the stone arch that we created, and the first thing I need to do is fill that hole right there. So if we dynamesh, we are going to be able to get the cool result or the effect that we're going for, but unfortunately, we're going to have a very ugly sort of like line going around the whole thing. You can see there all of the little polygons and triangles that are making a mess. So what I do here is I go with my smooth brush first to just smooth a little bit of that thing out. And then I'm going to be using trim dynamic. And the reason why I'm doing this is because usually with these borders, especially if you're going to be 3D printing or doing bakes later on, having those sort of like ugly n-gons and non-manifold geometry can really mess up the process. So I always recommend you guys clean these borders up, even if it takes a little while. I remember it took me here like 2 minutes or something. It's better to have clean edges than to struggle with other parts of the pipeline later on. Especially for 3D printing, slicers really hate when this happens because they will try to 3D print those polygons, and if they're like infinitely like flat, they're gonna have issues both on the resin tank or on the FDM printers. So you definitely want to avoid having this edges, and trim dynamic there, it's a perfectly valid option to just clean it up a little bit. You can also try some of the deformers like crisp edges or just like what's the word, like polish edge and stuff like that, but I just, in this case, since it's a little bit more organic, I try to follow that thing. Now here what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a little bit of clay buildup to clean up the shapes of the element, right? To clean up a little bit of the object and give it a more of an organic look. I was thinking this sort of like circular ruins were embedded in some stones and some sand. Now, since the main piece are, of course, the cubes, I didn't want to really like change that too much. So I'm just adding a little bit of volume there to give more support, and especially once we 3D print this, to have a little bit more weight on the bottom part so that this thing does not tip over. So while doing this, I'm also, of course, smoothing some of the polygon lines. This is a very common mistake that I see in 3D prints, where people do not smooth the lines thinking that the 3D print won't be as precise. But nowadays, 3D printers are really precise, so you really should clean every single point up so that you get the best result. Now here, I'm about to show you a very cool trick, which is how to add a detail without having to do a lot of work. And this is by using something called the surface noises. So if we go to the surface noise palette on the left side of the element, you're going to be able to select this granite option. And by modifying some of the sliders from the noise section, you're going to be able to tweak how much noise you want to introduce to this asset right there. You can see there on the little preview how we're getting this very interesting noise effect on like most of the surface. Now make sure to bring the plugin, or not, the noise scale all the way down so that you're only getting the noise from the plugin and not extra noise from ZBrush. And then playing with the scale right there, you can see that we get a just sort of like nice effect. Now a very cool trick here is that once you have something that you like, you can actually go to the little curve that's going there from top to bottom, and you can modify that curve to generate a little bit of like erosion sort of effect. So instead of having a uniform noise across the whole surface, certain areas will have more noise than others. Now very important, you cannot just like leave it like that. Right now it's sort of like a virtual noise, kind of like a bump map. So you need to subdivide this thing a couple of times. I did that right there. And then you apply this to the mesh. And now that's actual geometry that you're going to be able to use. So here, now that I have the noise, I'm just gonna go with my Damien standard here and my clay buildup to start like generating or adding a little bit more form to the rocks. Now, I do use a couple of my own personal brushes. These are some marble damage brushes that I got years ago. I think I got them like 10 years ago. So unfortunately, I'm not sure exactly where I got them. I think I got them from Noman. So these marble brushes right here are very, very good. You can use pretty much any alpha, but this one's I really like because it has some very nice cracks. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use those cracks to like project those into the element and create like the separation between the stones. Now, a very common question, this is a common, well, not a common question, but this is a question that I got a couple of videos ago where someone was wondering, hey, do we need to do retopology if we're going to be doing 3D print? And the answer is no, absolutely not. You do not need to do that. 3D print doesn't care about topology. The only thing it cares about is watertight meshes, so meaning there's no hole and there's no sort of like infinitely thin mesh, and non-manifold geometry, so just, well, not angles. Angles you can triangulate, but when you have a face that's sharing two sides, that's when you can get some problems. So in this case, no need to do that. I'm just using some of this alphas to add more detail, a little bit of clay buildup here and there to, again, like modify the way this is working. And once we are happy in this case with the result, we can just keep moving forward onto the next piece. Now, a very important thing about 3D printing especially is that we do need to be a little bit mindful about how we create certain elements so that we don't have such a hard time later on the 3D printing process. For instance, you can see there, again, I'm getting that sort of like very thin edge, and that can be problematic, so I prefer to taper it down due to two reasons. Again, to avoid those little polygons, and also when you print this flat on the print bed, if it's completely flat, it can get something called an elephant's foot when it gets kind of crushed, and it gets really stuck onto the build platform, and then it's very difficult to remove, and you can get hurt because you need to use a lot of force. I actually got a cut from that not too long ago, and you can damage the build plate, which is of course undesirable. So here again, I'm going through all of the little borders there, cleaning them up, and just making sure that we get a nice flat border. On all of the noise that you see there on the underside, I'm also going to be removing it a little bit later using a clip brush that I'm going to use to draw a line and just like flatten everything to the top so that we don't have any issues there. Now, another thing here is, and you're going to see me do that with the little cubes in just a second, 3D printers do not like when you have very flimsy objects. So I've gotten this question quite a bit, like how about feathers or what about hair? You need to sculpt it, and you need to sculpt it a little bit more thick than you would normally expect it to be. And the reason is you can, like, I have a couple of like action figures right here. You can check them on action figures and stuff like that. They will always have things, especially hair, be a little bit more bulky because it's very difficult to print or manufacture very thin areas. So sculpted hair, sculpted feathers, things like that, they will always be a little bit thicker, and that's where you can use a little bit of stylization. So you're going to see me jump here into the... well, I'm adding just a couple of extra rocks there to make the whole thing a little bit nicer. Oh, that's very important. I'm adding a little bit of extra support on that area because those overhangs could potentially be problematic on the 3D printing areas. Now, I am going to have a new 3D printing course very soon. I'm finishing the retopology one, and then after that one, we're going to have the 3D printing and anatomy course. So we're going to talk about all of those like things to avoid or to be careful about when dealing with those stuff. Here what I'm doing, and this is important, all of these cubes, if you remember, we made them inside of Maya, and they were individual cubes. So I'm using Dynamesh with a high enough resolution that we don't get the sort of like weird, ugly connection between the cubes. So you really need to push your Dynamesh a little bit higher so that you avoid all of those like ugly tendrils right there. And I might also use, and I think I use it right here, a little bit of inflate just to give them a little bit of an extra volume there so that we don't have too many of those like crossing elements, because one, they look very ugly, and two, if we were to support them for 3D printing, this is going to be, it's actually right now being 3D printed in the resin 3D printer. It will be very, very difficult to deal with those elements. So as you can see there, I'm using a little bit of an inflate brush to make sure that the object is as solid and as like nicely formed as possible. Not too much so that we don't break that very nice cubic shape that we have, but just good enough so that we can, again, increase the Dynamesh, get the nice resolution, and avoid having those little like tendrils right there. So once we have that, well, in this case, we'll still have them right there. I think I'm going to increase the Dynamesh a little bit more there because it did not register. There you go. I think I went to something like 800 on the Dynamesh size. And there you go. As you can see right now, that's way, way better, and we're not having any more of an issue. And that's the fun part, because now we can actually get to start adding and destroying all of the things, right? So we can use, again, things such as trim dynamic and some of the like alpha brushes that I just showed you, the marble damage ones that I have, to add a little bit more detail. Now, I did some very fine detail, and I actually want to see if the printer was able to print it. I went for this sort of like concrete pores on the whole thing as a very, very minimal textures. Now, the size is roughly about this size, so I don't know, like 6 centimeters or something like that, probably a little bit bigger. We can definitely print bigger, but since this is literally the second test that I'm doing on the new printer, I didn't want to like try something very, very, what's the word? Very, oh man, I forgot about the word. Ambitious, that's the word. So I didn't want to try something as ambitious as like a super huge ring, and it's still going to be quite big though. So there you go. That's the little like fine detail that I'm adding. And this is, I was telling this during like the recording of this thing. The 3D printing industry has gone so far in the past couple of years. The first 3D printer I got was back in 2016, and it cost me 4 times as much as what the current like printers cost, and the detail was like 10 times worse. So we are getting better resolutions, we're getting faster printing times, we're getting more resistant materials. So there's a lot of things, and if you want to get into 3D printing, I mean, you're still in a very good position. I still talk to a lot of my friends, and they don't own a 3D printer. So it's still, I wouldn't say like an untapped market, but it's definitely a market that not a lot of people get into, because it does require a little bit of like DIY, right? You need to really know and experiment a little bit. It's not like just like copy and paste. You're going to struggle, you're going to have some errors, and you got to have that sort of like engineering mind where you don't care about getting into the machine and understanding how it works and why it does what it does. But it's a very, very, like, I think it's a very magical thing, because not only are we doing something very cool here inside of the software designs for ZBrush or Maya, but we actually see it physically. And the first time, I remember the first time I grabbed one of my 3D prints of my own characters, and was like, wow, it's here, right? Like, it's not just on the computer, on the screen, on a render. It's physically here, and that has a lot of power. Even though we love the digital world and we live in it, the physical world still has something to it that makes it very, very special. So here I think ZBrush crashed or something, and hopefully I was able to recover it. And yeah, after that we just continue adding a couple of details. Now, before we jump onto the final part, which I'm also going to narrate on top because we also had that microphone issue, before we do that, I just want to tell you guys that it's very important that you decimate your pieces, because once we go into the slicer, if you go with a very, very heavy file because you want to conserve all of the detail, that's fine, but it's going to take a long time to slice. Once it slices, printing time is going to be exactly the same, but the slicing process might take a little bit more time, and that's something that you definitely want to avoid. So here what I'm going to do as soon as I finish these details is I'm going to combine all of them. I'm going to merge them together into a single subtool, and once all of those elements are a single subtool, we're of course going to be applying a decimation master to reduce the amount of polygons to like 10% of the whole thing. If you guys have not heard about decimation master, come on. Like, we've been using it for so many things in the past couple of months or so. Just watching the other ZBrush tutorials here on the channel, and you're gonna see what it is. And if you want to learn a little bit more about it, of course, we have the ZBrush course available down here in the description, where we go not only over that, but a lot of the tools that I used to create this piece right here. Now, one of the things that I liked about this piece was that I can like, we've been doing a lot of single, like, how do we call them? Single software like elements, right? Single software like projects. And this is the first one where we're actually jumping between things. We started in Maya, we went to ZBrush, and now we're gonna go into Cheetahbox for the 3D printing process, or the 3D printing preparation. So yeah, just keep in mind that once you're in the studio, once you're working as a freelancer, or once you're doing this in a more professional way, you don't have to do everything in a single software. If you have the licenses and if you have the softwares, it's very, very common to be able to jump, or to not to be able to actually jump from one to another and use the best tools from every single software to generate like whatever it is you're working with. So again, here is the decimation process, and yeah, we're about to jump onto the Chitubox process. Now, the reason why the Chitubox the reason why the Chitubox process is very important, or the support process, is because even though we could again print this flat into the bed, and I'm pretty confident it will hold because the overhangs are all supported by the same structure, it's always better to just be safe than sorry. I'd rather be safe than sorry. So whenever I'm preparing something for anything, it could be 3D printing, it could be renders or whatever, I always do my test. I always take my time. This is a very good advice that I was given when I was first starting this. It was like, someone told me, whenever you're thinking about doing a project, always give yourself a little bit of a cushion in time and a little bit of a cushion in money. So for instance, let's say that I want to print this and it's going to be I don't know, 800 grams of resin, which is about one bottle, right? If I just buy one bottle, I'm setting myself off for failure, because if it fails midway through, I'm not going to have enough resin to do another run, right, or another test. So you always give yourself that cushion so that if something bad happens, hopefully it doesn't, you're ready to do so. So this is Chitubox right here. I'm setting up with the Saturn 3 Ultra, which is the one that I have. I'm just leaving everything default, not changing anything like important, and we're gonna bring this. Now, very important, when you're 3D printing, you want to use either STL or OBJ. They do not like FBX. FBX is more for the entertainment industry. So in here, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to position it in the best possible way. Now, as I mentioned, technically, we could print it flat on the bed. But as I mentioned before, printing it flat generates a little bit of like a lot of tension on the plate and on the screen. So it can be a little bit difficult to print because there's going to be a lot of suction going on, and it could also be a little bit difficult to remove from the plate, which sucks. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale this up so that we have a bigger print. There we go. That's the full size that we're going to go for. And I'm going to rotate this slightly. I'm going to tilt it a little bit. You're going to see this very commonly in like little figures for like tabletop gaming, where they're not going to be completely straight. They're almost always going to be a little bit towards the back, so that all of the supports are hanging on the back of the character. And when you remove them, sometimes you will get a little bit of damage. I'm going to cover how to not get that damage on the full course, or how to avoid as much of that damage as possible. But you give yourself again another sort of like cushion by doing the supports on the back of the character, so that if you get some damage, it's not going to be as visible. So it's kind of like UV seams where you want to hide them. Well, supports is a very similar thing. You want to hide the supports. So in this case, as I'm mentioning, I'm going to rotate this, tilt this 15 degrees. In this case, it's more than enough. That removes a lot of the suction information, or a lot of the tension that you're gonna get from pulling such a big piece from the build plate. And yes, it's gonna require a little bit more supports, but it's not that big of a deal. Actually, you're gonna see me here going into the support section of this slicer. There's multiple slicers, by the way, but this one is the one that I've been using for a long time, and for me, it's been working fine. And here what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for the first couple layers, and I'm going to start using medium and heavy supports so that it really like grabs the element and prints it. If you guys have more questions about how this works, again, I'm not the most expert person. There's people that do 3D printing for a living. Like, actually, I do this more as a hobby or side part of my job. I don't have like a factory of 3D printers working all day. But if you want to learn a little bit more, just leave me your questions down here, and I'm going to try to answer as best as I can, or guide you to some of the people that I follow that could be very helpful in your 3D printing journey. Now here I realized that it was going to take me forever to fill the whole thing, so it's like, hey, it's a fairly simple one. There's nothing, like not a very complex element, so I'm just going to use automatic supports here on the bottom. And yeah, and then after I did the automatics right there, I started going into specific areas where I felt that you might need a couple of extra elements. And again, this is sort of like my philosophy when this is part of the process. Is like I rather be safe than sorry. So even if it takes me extra resin and extra time, I'm gonna add a couple of extra supports there, because I rather have a successful print than a failed print that was optimized to give me like the smaller supports and the less resin used and stuff like that. So I'll rather be, again, safe than sorry. I've seen some people that like to optimize things and be like, oh, I'm just going to use the minimal amount of supports and the smaller supports possible so that I get a perfect piece. It's like, yeah, that's fine, but this is the basis, so it's really not going to be that much of a problem. For a big figure, maybe for like a collectible or something like that, definitely, or the final prototype of something, then that should definitely be one of the things that you look for. But for this one, I just went for the general, like most like safest option for this, again, this second test that I'm doing on the printer. I'm adding some heavy supports right there, and that's pretty much it. Once this is done, the next thing that we need to do is a couple of settings here on the slicer for the time that's going to take each layer to cure. The way this works, by the way, it's pretty much like this thing going down. It presses on the screen. The screen highlights the areas that's going to harden. It's a UV resin, so it uses UV light to harden the resin. And then it lifts up and does this a bunch of times. I think this was like 2,000 layers or something that's going to go through. And each layer takes a specific amount of time, because if you take too much time, then you start losing some of the detail. And if you take too little time, then it doesn't have enough time to harden. I'm using Elegoo Fast Resin, just like the standard fast resin. So it is recommended to have 25 exposure time for the first few layers that are going to be the important layers that are going to hold everything up, and then 1.5 from 1 to 1.5 seconds per layer on the next layers. So I think I did for this one 1.5 on the exposure layers and 25 on the base layers. Yeah, there you go, 1.5. And then there's one thing called the lift speed. So it's how fast this thing is going to be lifting. Again, the faster it is, the faster your print's going to be. I prefer to be safer than sorry. So I brought this 20 seconds down. So it's instead of 90 millimeters per second, I went to 70 millimeters per second, which is going to make this a little bit easier and give it a little bit more time so that it can like properly like elevate, take, or like like disconnect from the screen, grab the proper layers, and then keep going. And I checked this, by the way. At this time, this thing is right now printing in the backside here, and I've checked it, and it's been working perfectly fine. Can you tweak these values again to be faster, to be more efficient, and stuff like that? Yes, of course you can. Of course you can do all of this. However, again, I'd rather be safe than sorry. So yeah, this is it, guys. This is the final part of the process here in Chitubox, and once we save this file, we're ready to go into the printer, fill it with resin, and go into doing this little model. Now, I'm not going to be able to show this model on this video, but it will be very soon on the review of that printer. So make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you back on the next one. So that's it, my friend. That's the end of the journey. I'm going to be showing this 3D print in the upcoming review of the new 3D printer that we got here. So make sure to tune in, make sure to subscribe again if you have not subscribed, and if you want to check our Discord channel or all of our other socials, the links are going to be down here on the description. If you like this type of content, and again, I'm sorry for the talk over I had to do because of an issue with the volume and the microphone and stuff. But yeah, if you like this type of content, let me know, and I'll be happy to make more for you. That's it, my friends. I'll see you back on the next one.